Which bike do we take today? I think we take the Buell. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If this is your guys' first time watching the channel, make sure you go down and subscribe. If you're clicking on this video, most likely you're trying to get into buying a motorcycle and you're wondering where you should even start from. Well, hopefully this video will make it a little bit easier. Let's put some heat into the Buell, take it out on a little ride, and talk about whether or not it's a good idea to get a motorcycle that's over 1,000 cc's for your first bike or not. So unfortunately, it seems like all my places to film are closed down right now, but I have pulled the bike out. So let's talk a little bit about actually getting into riding and what types of motorcycles you might want to consider, or how you should even rate which bikes are good bikes to learn on and which bikes are bad to learn on. Now, this behind me is a Buell, and it is a 1,280 cc bike. This thing was built for racing. It makes over 100 horsepower and isn't the most beginner friendly motorcycle out there. In fact, I would say this is a very hard bike to ride compared to any bike I've ever rode in the past. And this was the first bike that I ever rode on, and the bike that I have the most experience on. This bike was my first introduction into riding on the streets, and it has been the bike I have rode the most. When I learned how to ride, I learned on this bike, and that for a lot of people might come as a surprise. Wait, you learned on a 1,000 cc bike? You learned on a bike that has over 100 horsepower and is built for racing? Yeah, I did. And let me tell you what it boils down to and why I was comfortable riding this bike. It boils down to experience and responsibility behind a machine. I've driven sports cars in the past, I know how to drive a manual transmission, and I have ridden dirt bikes in the past. Now, the dirt bikes I've been on have been, 90 cc or less, and didn't have any type of gearing whatsoever, but I knew the balance, I knew how the throttle worked, I knew how the brakes worked, and I knew how a manual transmission and a clutch and gears worked. Riding one of these is simply doing all of those things all in one. You're using the clutch in your hand, you're using the throttle the same way, you're leaning the same way, but you're going significantly faster and have significantly more horsepower. Now, do I recommend just because you know how to drive a manual transmission and know how to ride a dirt bike with no gears to jump into a 1,000 cc bike? No, because not all of you guys are going to be as responsible as I was when I was riding the bike. Now, I'm not trying to say that I'm better than everyone and that you guys can't learn on 1,000 cc bikes, because most of you guys are more than capable of riding a machine this fast, and a lot of people are better at riding than I am. But the thing is, I daily a 400 horsepower Mustang. I've driven BMW sports cars. I've driven a lot of these cars in the past, and I kind of know how to handle power and be responsible behind the wheel. This isn't my first powerful machine that I've ever been on. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, the only thing it really has to do with what I'm trying to say is I have always been responsible behind the wheel of my Mustang. I bought that car when I was 18 years old. I drove it through Wisconsin winters. That means snow, ice, slush, all of these different things. I know that I'm capable of knowing when to go fast and when to go slow. 1,000 cc bikes have a much higher top end. The only time you're really going to be using the difference between a 350 and a 1,000 is on low end torque, or unless you're going insanely fast. In normal street circumstances, you're never going to notice a difference between a 350 and a 1,000 other than the bottom end. You're going to have significantly more power and torque down low, and it's just going to be much more easier to speed up, but realistically that's the only difference. The point I'm trying to make is if you've had a little bit of experience behind a two-wheeled machine with a motor, you know how to drive a manual transmission, and you're comfortable with your ability of riding a motorcycle, and you think you're responsible enough to ride a 1,000 cc machine without going full blast and without being irresponsible with it, you should be fine, because these machines are going to handle the same. It's not like a wicked thing that it's going to get away from you. If you let the bike get away from you and you're pinning it and you're doing reckless things, the bike is going to give you problems. You're going to end up in some sketchy situations because of the machine that you're choosing to ride irresponsibly. Now, the thing is, most people cannot be responsible enough to ride a machine like this at a beginner level because it is a harder machine to ride. It's harder to turn, it's harder to lean with, it's got a ton of horsepower, and it's just not something that's beginner friendly. The clutch is harder, and just putting gears in is harder. Everything in this bike is harder than a 250 is going to be. Because once again, this was developed to go racing. The first time I ever rode a bike was this bike down a real street. And I was able to pick it up within about a minute or two of riding the bike. Now, I knew a couple of basics. I've had experience on things like this before. But if you've never had experience on anything like that before, please do not jump into something like this. But if you've never rode a bike before, you don't really know what you're doing, please don't jump on a 1000cc or even a 500cc for that matter. Go to something small like a 125, a 250, because I've seen people in my motorcycle class, because I did take the motorcycle learning class or safety course or whatever you want to call it, and I saw people falling off of 250s because they've never ever done anything like that before. It comes down to two things: whether or not you can ride a 1000cc for your first bike, whether or not you're responsible, and whether or not you have any type of experience doing something like this in the past. And just because you can ride a motorcycle doesn't mean that you can ride on the streets. Also keep that in mind. Street riding and being able to actually ride a motorcycle are two completely different things. Just because you know how to operate the clutch, the gears, and the throttle doesn't mean you're ready for the road. So if you're watching this thinking, yeah, I've rode dirt bikes in the past, I think I can be responsible enough to ride a 1000cc motorcycle for my first bike, go for it. Just keep in mind, you need to always be cautious of how much power you actually have. Regardless of what bike you're on, and whether it's a 1000cc, a 250, make sure you be careful and consider your options for your safety, because you can always upgrade into a more powerful bike after you get comfortable with your lower powered bike. I hope this video has helped you in any way, whether you guys were considering a 1000cc for your first bike, or whether you guys have literally no experience and don't even know where to start. A 1000cc for someone who has no idea what they're doing isn't the right place to go, but a light bike like a 350, 300, 250 is probably the way to go if you have zero experience with anything like this. And for those of you who are responsible enough and have some experience and you think you can hop on a bike like this, I did it, I haven't had any problems, and I'm sure that you guys can as well. Just make sure you're being careful with a machine like this. Motorcycles are dangerous whether it's a 250, a 125, or a 1200. At the end of the day, it comes down to being careful about others around you and making sure that you be a responsible rider. But that's all I have for the video. If you guys did enjoy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, leave a comment on what you think down below. But as always, I'm going to catch you guys in the next video.